Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to 90 Day Fiancé latest news. Jenny Slatten was taken to the hospital 2 days ago after having a heart attack. 2 nights ago, an ordinary dinner turned into something extraordinary for a woman who many people know from screens and reality TV. After eating and going to bed, Jenny Slatten suddenly felt a crushing chest pain that was so bad it changed the normal flow of the evening. Her husband, Sumit Singh, rushed her to the emergency room, where doctors began the first round of tests and treatments that would define the first 48 hours of this episode. The fall happened suddenly and without warning. Friends and relatives later talked about how shocked they were to hear that a normal household moment had turned into an emergency, and how their private routine had become a scene of urgent decisions. Sumit acted quickly and decisively. He called for help, drove her to the nearest hospital, and triage nurses and emergency doctors received Jenny under full monitoring protocols. They then began the diagnostic process that would confirm how serious the situation was. In the emergency room, the first steps were the most important ones in the first few hours of a suspected myocardial event. These included electrocardiography to look for ischemic changes, serial blood tests to measure cardiac enzymes, imaging to rule out complications, and continuous telemetry to guard against arrhythmias. During those early hours, the attending team balanced aggressive stabilization with careful assessment, giving pain relief, oxygen when needed, and medications to stop further clotting while they waited for clearer diagnostic confirmation. Family members who came to the hospital said it was both clinical and personal. The fluorescent half-light of the ER, the soft beeps of monitors, clinicians moving in the rhythm of procedures, and relatives clustered in the hallway sharing bits of information and trying to stay calm. The medical team made it clear to Jenny's family that this was a serious cardiac event. While her condition was more stable than it had been when she collapsed, the road to recovery would not be short. The doctors described the recovery process as phased and prolonged, stressing the need for ongoing observation, specialty consults, optimization of medications, and a gradual cardiac rehabilitation plan based on the extent of the myocardial injury. At the same time, a picture of Jenny lying in a hospital bed went viral on social media, turning private pain into a public spectacle and filling comment fields with a mix of prayer, shock, and debate about the ethics of sharing such pictures. The viral picture became a new reality for the family, who had to deal with a flood of sympathy and invasive curiosity at the same time that clinicians gave sobering updates and family members made arrangements for care. Sumit, who was both an advocate and a sick partner, was seen by friends and hospital staff as he moved between managing logistics, contacting family members, working with medical teams, making sure medications were available, and gathering records, and holding vigil at Jenny's bedside. His presence was a calming presence for both clinicians and family members. Those immediate logistical duties were really important. Make sure there was 24-hour monitoring, set up specialty cardiology consultations, make sure there was access to the right drugs and testing, let family know, take care of childcare and housekeeping needs, and bring personal items from home for the hospital stay. Friends and co-workers who visited the hospital said that there was a sense of calm panic mixed with determination. They talked about plans to organize shifts of family members at the hospital, offers of food and help for the couple's daughter, and a unified request to the public and media to give the medical process space to happen without constant interference. Doctors warned Jenny about the common problems that can happen after a heart attack, such as arrhythmia, heart failure, and mental distress. They also said that she would need careful monitoring for these problems and an integrated plan that includes not only cardiac medication and a staged exercise program, but also counseling to help her deal with the shock and emotional fallout. The family is under a lot of stress right now because of the suddenness of the event, the uncertainty of medical outcomes, and the added pressure of public attention. Hospital social workers started to help by giving brief debriefings and referrals for family counseling. Professionals told the family to delegate tasks, accept help from others, and get as much rest as possible while still being available for medical updates. In the first 2 days, the story has been mostly about stabilizing treatments, medical predictions that stressed caution, and a flood of public concern. Clinicians repeatedly told the family that while the critical phase had been navigated, The exact path of recovery would depend on how much heart muscle damage there was and how the patient responded to initial therapy and rehabilitation. This was a simple but difficult prognosis. Survival and stabilization are only the beginning of the timeline, and there will be many measured steps before normalcy can be considered. The immediate priority for Sumit and Jenny's family is to make sure that someone is always at the hospital while also taking care of the needs of the household and keeping their daughter safe from the worst parts of what is happening. For the clinical team, the priority is to finish diagnostic imaging, see if any invasive procedures are needed, and start the long process of planning for medication optimization and rehabilitation. Outside the hospital room, fans and followers sent in messages of support and prayers through comment threads. This created a digital chorus that was warm but also raised problems about privacy and how much people are watching when someone is going through a personal crisis. 2 days after that normal night turned into a medical emergency, the main facts are clear. Jenny suddenly had severe chest pain that made her collapse. Sumit rushed her to the hospital. Doctors stabilized her and found a major cardiac event. Family members gathered at the hospital, tired and on guard. Medical staff warned that recovery would be long and difficult. And the viral image of Jenny in a hospital bed has turned a private tragedy into a public moment that has both comforted and complicated the family's experience. For now, the story is in the hospital room, where monitors keep up their steady chorus, clinicians plan the next tests and treatments, Sumit and his family wait with cautious hope, and the public sends prayers through screens that can't speed up the slow medical work of recovery. 2 days after an ordinary dinner turned into a crisis, the scene in a small hospital room was painfully simple and endlessly complex at the same time. Monitors breathing soft rhythms, a woman lying on a single bed whose public life has long been played out on screens, a husband who had moved from the private chaos of their home to the clinical order of emergency medicine with the same urgent, unpracticed steadiness anyone finds when confronted by sudden illness, and a corridor outside where relatives, friends, and the machinery of worry gathered in shallow clusters. People who were there said that the moment Jenny Slatten felt the chest pain so bad that it stopped the normal flow of evening was like a break in normal time into emergency time, where seconds feel like minutes, and the small choices that follow a pulse of fear become the building blocks for what comes next. She lay down in bed after dinner, as she regularly did. The chest ache started suddenly, a pressure that quickly grew until the room was filled with alarm. Sumit Singh didn't think twice before acting. He instinctively called for aid, found a way to go from home to the hospital, and gathered his keys and drove with all the usual caution thrown out the window by the urgent need to save a loved one. That drive, which was like the sound of a siren in another universe, was replaced by the easy, heavy road to the nearest emergency room, where nurses and doctors were trained to deal with sudden and severe cases. During those initial few hours, the clinical response was brutally practical. Checks and procedures that weren't meant to be comfortable, but to keep people alive. An electrocardiogram was done to record the heart's electrical activity at that moment. Blood was drawn to check for enzymes that show how much pain the muscle is in. If the readings showed that it might help, oxygen was given. Medications were given that thin the blood, ease pain, and target the immediate causes of the collapse. All of those things happened in the area between fear and hope, where biology sets the pace and human goodness attempts to keep up. The doctors that were there informed the family what they already knew. This was a serious heart incident. They said that stabilization had been reached to the point where the immediate crisis was no longer a threat, but that stabilization was not the same as recovery. The shape of the next few months will depend on how bad the injury was and how the body reacted to carefully measured therapy. Family members who had come at different times, some in shock, some with the cold efficiency of people who work best under pressure, gathered in the waiting area and around the bed in short bursts, exchanging news, passing phones, and trying to take care of the small but important tasks that had become necessary. Who stays and who goes home to check on the child, who gets documents and wallets, who calls the workplace, and who manages the social instructions that often come up after a public figure's health crisis. The family's tiredness showed in the creases on their faces and the little things they did, like half closing their eyes, never resting their hands, and lowering their voices to match the beeping that filled the room. There was an ache in the emotional geography of those 2 days that is hard to put into words. It was the sudden awareness of vulnerability, the long waits in the hallways, and the short conversations with doctors that gave both hope and the need to get ready for less hopeful outcomes. Doctors talked about phases such as acute stabilization, diagnostic clarity, a time of careful observation, medication optimization, and then a rehabilitation path that might include specialty consultations, graded physical therapy, and lifestyle counseling that moves at the slower pace of habit change rather than the drama of the emergency room. They told the family to be patient by using words like phased, monitored, and gradual. They told them to be ready for a long series of small outcomes, not just one big one. Improvements in hours, a clearer read in days, a rehabilitation plan in weeks, and a new normal that sometimes took months to measure. The viral photo that spread quickly on social media added to the family's already high level of stress. Someone took a picture of Jenny in a hospital bed, and it showed how vulnerable she was in a very clear way. The picture sparked a flood of feelings on the public networks that have been following her life. Prayers, urgent messages, judgments, and a debate about the ethics of sharing private moments from hospital rooms. That flood was both a blessing and a curse for the family. The torrent of well wishes was a clear sign of the goodwill that had built up over years in the public eye. On the other side, the level and amount of attention made things more difficult when they needed to be quiet, focused, and careful with the moving elements of clinical treatment. Sumit was not only his wife's partner at the bedside, but he was also the inadvertent manager of public updates. He had to balance his wife's demand for privacy with the fact that thousands of strangers were sending their love and waiting for news. The hospital staff became unofficial anchors, giving clinical updates in measured language, telling the family when to relax, and suggesting that they see a social worker to help them deal with both the practical and emotional aftermath of the event. Social workers and nurses carefully led the family members towards simple, long-lasting actions. Accept aid when it comes. Rotate shifts so that no one person has to stay up the whole time. Let doctors make clinical judgments while the family gives presence and context. The early logistical tasks were boring but important. Confirming medication lists, requesting previous medical records, checking insurance and emergency contacts, and bringing a toothbrush and a change of clothes from home. When those basic things were taken care of, they made a framework for the family's emotional energy to rest on, even if it was only for a short time. Clinicians explicitly cautioned about prevalent post-cardiac event complications that necessitate monitoring even as the immediate threat diminishes. Perilous arrhythmias that may manifest unpredictably in the hours and days subsequent to a heart attack. The potential for heart failure if a significant quantity of heart muscle sustains damage. The likelihood of clotting or embolic occurrences contingent on the nature of the injury, and the often overlooked yet profoundly experienced. Psychological impact, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and depression that frequently ensue from an event that distinctly delineates before from after. Conversations with cardiologists covered both the mechanical and behavioral issues, such as controlling blood pressure, managing lipids, quitting smoking if necessary, making changes to the diet, and carefully reintroducing activity through cardiac rehabilitation programs that stress steady progress over big leaps. Those programs are as much about gaining confidence as becoming healthy. They provide patients tools and measures that make recovery clear and manageable, which helps with the randomness of the medical crisis. The family, holding on to a thin thread of control where they could, started to make plans for the next several weeks even though the hours in the emergency department still felt fresh. Who would take time off work to stay at the hospital, how to tell the couple's daughter about the event honestly but without causing too much worry, whether to ask spiritual advisors or close friends for extra help, and how to handle the social media narrative so that unwanted speculation didn't add to their stress. These were the choices they made while they were still very scared. Friends and coworkers from the world of reality TV and beyond were a quiet comfort. They came in small groups, brought food, and offered to help with everyday tasks so the family could relax for short periods of time. They asked the audience for space and privacy, and instead of asking questions that were too personal, they asked for prayers. Those pleas were real, but they were also weak in a world where a single picture can change the emphasis of a worldwide audience in a matter of minutes. Even though this medical event was quite public, the body, the doctors, the bed, and the sluggish delivery of care were all kept private. In a monitored ward, the immediate indicators, oxygen saturation, blood pressure, heart rhythm, urine output, and pain scores, were closely monitored, and any minor change, whether it was up or down, had meaning. An increase in enzyme levels might demonstrate the severity of muscle damage, while a stabilization of rhythm indicated a reduced chance of urgent, abrupt consequences. Normalizing vital signs enabled clinicians to proceed to the subsequent phase of care with measured hope. There were also pleasant things that came with warnings. Getting well in 24 hours doesn't mean things will go smoothly from there, but it's a crucial first step. Over the course of 2 days, medical teams came and went, consulting cardiology specialists who looked for the best way to open a blocked vessel. They had to decide whether an invasive procedure like angiography or stenting was needed, whether conservative medical therapy was the safest option, how to balance anti-clotting therapies with the risk of bleeding, and how to create a medication regimen that would lower the risk of recurrence while helping the heart heal. Those decisions are rarely simple and require a sophisticated clinical judgment that takes into account imaging, enzyme kinetics, and the patient's overall condition. The family's emotional state changed with each test result. One piece of information could turn anxiety into action, while another could ease it into the fragile relief that comes with the following update. The waiting became the main rhythm of the story, with its exact and taxing way of waiting for the test to be read, the specialist to come, and the next set of instructions. Life outside the waiting room went on. Phones lit up with messages, a popular photo kept going around, and a public used to the ups and downs of reality TV held its breath in the form of likes and prayers. But within the room, the measures were more important than the metrics on social media. They were the factors that would decide if a gradual rehabilitation was viable or if a more intense intervention was needed. Sumit's nights at the hospital were especially hard because he had to be both a partner and a public figure. He had to be there for Jenny, taking in and passing on clinical information, while simultaneously dealing with the flood of calls and messages from family and the public. He was permitted to cry for a short time in private. In public, he became the protector of a steadier face that friends thought was required for the couple's daughter and for those who watched from afar. In the early morning hours, when the monitors were humming and the ward was settling into its nighttime rhythm, doctors encouraged sleep, talked about diet for recovery, and started talking about the long road to recovery that would follow discharge. If discharge happened at the earliest reasonable time. Their words were carefully chosen and often heavy. "This is recoverable," they would remark, "but it's not easy. It will take time, commitment, and a completely different way of looking at rest and exercise." That advice was scary, but it also gave me a framework, clear stages and deadlines that turned a scary randomness into a series of activities I could handle. The popular image made it harder for the family to move on. People sent messages of support along with offers of meals, childcare, and help with logistics. Some messages went too far, such conjecture and an intrusive desire for details that did more to draw attention than to aid. Friends talked about the influx, keeping what they thought was useful and getting rid of what they thought was not. The family was thankful for the help, but they were also worried about being seen. They requested for privacy in the one place where it was most needed, the area where medical teams worked and where a woman lay struggling to slowly regain the strength her heart had lost. In the medical narrative, there existed, in addition to the clinical evaluations and procedural decisions, a human narrative concerning expectations. People expect certain things like a quick recovery and a return to normalcy, but the heart's physiology frequently requires more modest expectations. A shift in pace, a rethinking of risk, and a promise to make changes that will last. Doctors were honest about this. The first priority is to keep the patient alive and stable. The second is to stop any immediate problems. And the third is to plan a way back to a life that may look like the previous one, but will be based on new habits and being careful. For Jenny, that meant not only taking her medications on time, but also going through structured cardiac rehabilitation, learning to read the body's signals without panicking, dealing with sources of stress that may have led to the event, and getting psychological care to deal with the shock of getting sick all of a sudden. Family members were urged to avoid two common mistakes: downplaying the event because the acute crisis is over, or blowing every small symptom out of proportion. Instead, doctors suggested keeping an eye on the patient, following up on time, and having a clear plan for when to increase treatment. That planning included practical things like putting up a supervised exercise program, making sure patients could get their prescriptions, and establishing up a network of daily check-ins that could let doctors know about concerns before they became crises. Caregivers typically say that the first 48 hours are when the prognosis starts to take shape. During those hours, the team acquired the information they needed to outline a route. Some things couldn't be changed, like the type of injury or the patient's overall condition, but many could be changed by taking thoughtful, regular steps. The adjustment in private habits was big and helpful for a family that was used to being in the public eye. The kid would need truthful but age-appropriate explanations. Friends would need to be organized so that offers of help turned into real help. And social media messages would need to be limited so that the couple could take in what was important without being overwhelmed. Through years of reality TV, Jenny had built a community around her. This community showed up in many ways, including public prayers, private messages of financial and logistical support, and small acts of kindness that made the hard days a little easier, like meals, rides, and the promise of a shoulder. During these early days, the medical staff kept sending updates at a regular pace that were honest, but also understood that the prognosis is always changing. They were careful about making firm forecasts because the heart's mending isn't always straightforward. A day's progress is encouraging but not conclusive. But they were also honest enough to tell the family that healing is often delayed and that there may be setbacks. That honesty, while sobering, helped people set their expectations in line with the most likely paths, which made the next steps clearer. More tests to find any remaining problems, discussions about whether to use invasive or conservative treatments if blockages were found, and starting a regimen of medicines that could include beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, statins, and antiplatelet agents as needed. When it came to invasive procedures like angiography or stenting, doctors had to look at detailed images and carefully weigh the risks and benefits. When blockages are small and easy to reach, interventions can make a big difference, but every procedure has its own risks and should be considered in light of the patient's overall stability and preferences. As a couple who had learned to live in public somehow found themselves navigating the rawness of the private, the days that followed were marked by a slow, focused determination. Clinicians kept watch, family members kept vigil, and the public sent prayers that, while intangible, felt like a presence. There were times when things got a little better. The monitor showed a constant beat, Jenny's blood pressure stayed the same, and she had a short chat with Sumit where she smiled weakly. Those times were like small torches that helped the family get through long hours of exams and observations. 2 days after the tragedy, the medical story was still in its early chapters. The patient was stable, but recovery was still a long way off. Diagnostics were being done to figure out the exact extent of the heart injury, and a cautious strategy was being made for what to do next. For the family, this meant staying involved, relying on the support of friends and coworkers, and carefully controlling the public story by asking for seclusion while gratefully accepting the outpouring of support. For doctors, it meant keeping track of things, stepping in when needed, and giving patients a means to move forward that was both hopeful and realistic. And for the people who were watching, it meant waiting, praying, and sending messages that, in their number and sincerity, made up a modern chorus of support that helped a family through an unexpected and hard medical crisis. This gossip is over. If you liked the video, then give your opinion in the comment box and stay with us by subscribing the channel. Thank you.